Hello, BookTube. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have the lovely Lady Jane Books, and she is here with me because she co-hosted the month of June's read for the Black Hearts Book Club, which was this book here, Gory Details, Adventures from the Dark Side of Science by Erica Engelhoff. So, thank you so much, Jane, for agreeing to co host again this month with me. And your lighting just looks so angelic. And I love
Thank
that
you.
blouse. You look
Thank
great.
you. Green. Carrie gave me the memo that she found like the perfect shirt for this, and I was like, well, I have to wear a green shirt now, and this is the only green shirt that I own. So we're matching. We went the extra mile. We're ready for our gory details discussion.
We did. We got a few people in the chat. So,
Hi,
hello, Cool
hi,
Gamer,
Sam.
Sam, Kevin,
Hi, Kevin.
and Jason Cross. Good to
Hi,
see you
Jason.
guys.
How are you? Thanks for stopping in.
So, Cape Cotter, Kevin, he was actually in on this group read. We also had Mark from Book Time with Elvis, Anne from Anne with a Book. I think she was a little
Mhm.
behind in the read, but she was in there. And Shannon from Shannon's
Shannon.
Bookish Musings and Music. And she actually already did a video on Gory Details. So,
And it was so
if you
good. It was so
yeah, if you
good.
guys are interested, check that one
It
out. She
really
did a
is.
really great job. And then Katie Reads and Rants. She was actually still reading this book today. I saw on her Instagram story that she was still reading it. And who else am I forgetting? Am I forgetting anyone else, Jane?
Elvis. Book time with Elvis.
Yep, Mark. We got
Mark
Mark.
and Elvis. Yeah. I think we got them all. I think we
I
do.
think we got them all. But if
And
anyone
me.
else was
There we
in
go.
on that,
Me.
and you,
There I am.
if anyone else was in on that, feel free to pop in the chat. But I guess just to start, Jane, give us kind of the overall impression, overall and thoughts about this book.
Well, I have to say, I loved this so much. Listen, you know, Lady Jane, you know, I like the dark and dreary and gross stuff. The name's Gory Details. You knew I was going to show up for this.
I
So
did.
when, so yeah, so when Carrie said like, "Hey, this is going to be a nonfiction read about all the really like gross, creepy, unsettling, taboo things in the world, but with a science twist," you knew I was going to be there. Like you knew it. So I was hesitant at first because I remember I was looking at the index and I think I texted you, Carrie, and I was like, "Carrie, this book is wild. Like I'm looking at some of these subjects and I'm like, what are we going to do?" But I have to say, I really, really liked it. And the reason I loved it is because it did not shy away from any of the gory details, but it did it in a way that was so science and fact based. It was so interesting. So even though things were kind of gross and a little unsettling, you couldn't look away. So I loved it. I thought it was really cool. Carrie, I want to hear what you thought of Gory Details.
So, the reason I picked this book up is because I saw it was written by a National Geographic writer and editor, and I've always subscribed to the National Geographic, so I knew it was going to be good. But when I started reading this, it made sense because the author started out as a blogger, and the chapters were really short, really quick, and they were easy to read. So I could definitely see that influence there. But she really impressed me because she really put some skin in the game. She visited a morgue. She ate bugs. She went to the
Solves
maggot farm.
crimes. She solved the
She
crimes.
solves crimes. So she really got into this in a real way. And, that's kind of what you expect from National Geographic. You expect them to seek out these remote places or things and kind of help you discover new worlds. And I really felt like she made the content, as gross as some of this was, very accessible. And she really kind of tried to explain why a lot of us do have these morbid curiosities. And she almost made me feel better about that side of my personality because, she framed it in a way that, you know, we're not just morbid, dark people. This is part of the human
Natural.
experience. You're just trying to um, really discover the world around you and sometimes within you and on you, as we'll talk about some mites and things
In
that
your
are on us.
eyeballs?
But yeah, so it was a lot more to this book than like the shock factor, because I
Yes.
think when people, you see the title in big letters, you think, okay, this is cheap thrills, this is just, you know it's just going to be gross and shocking, and that wasn't the case. So I was really impressed.
I totally agree. And something else that I really liked about it is that she sprinkled in humor every once in a while. So that way, even when it was getting a little intense and you were
Right.
starting to like kind of back away, she made a joke and it was like, oh, okay, like I'm not weird for thinking like that. So I really liked her approach in that way about all the subjects.
And Kevin said, I like that it brought up potential solutions to problems, like new ways of diagnosing diseases and burning fat bergs for energy. Yeah, I really liked that too, Kevin. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of the book I read on fungi, Entangled
Mm.
Life, because that book was definitely more sciencey, but it really explored how fungi is underutilized. And I do feel like the author here did point out some really cutting edge things that are, happening in science, or there's the possibility there. So I really liked that too. And I was glad that the content didn't scare anyone away, because once we started reading this book, you get everybody in a group chat, and everyone's personality is different. And a couple chapters I was like, oof, I really hope
I really hope we
that
keep everyone by the end of this.
everyone sticks around and I don't get unfriended, by some by some of my booktube buddies here. But we all stuck it out, and I think it was definitely worth it.
Absolutely. And what's more is that we all had a great discussion about things and none of us like shied away from any awkwardness or anything because of the subject matter approached it that way. We felt comfortable approaching it that way. So
Yes.
I think we had a great time.
It's funny. I think people learned a lot about specifically Mark and I, because when we talked about the sweat and, the shows we watch, like, Dr. Pimple Popper and that sort of thing, I was like, wow, these folks must really be my friends, because they are learning a lot about me.
We're to win
um,
it now.
That's it. So the first chapter, I really enjoyed that, because I feel like that was kind of a soft opening to the book. And I don't know if you remember, Lady Jane, but the first chapter was about the nutshell studies.
I
So these
loved this one.
were, for those of you that are unfamiliar, essentially this woman in the 1930s, I believe, she created these really intricate, detailed models of crime scenes. And she did this in order to teach detectives about crime scene investigation. And so each of these little miniature crime scenes has a solution. And these solutions are kept under heavy guard, lock and key. And it's really used as a training tool. And initially, it was used at Harvard Medical School. They had a department of legal medicine there. And I believe the lady, Frances Lee was her name, I believe, she helped found that program. And when that program went defunct, the nutshell studies were taken to the Maryland Medical Examiner's office in Baltimore, which is where the author actually went to look at them. And she was there for a conference with other, other people, a few journalists like herself, but mostly law enforcement, detectives and investigators. And so it was really interesting to see her experience with that. And of course, she couldn't reveal any of the theories or the, you know, I guess solutions to these crime scenes. But I thought that was a really cool way to open the book, um, because they're kind of cute. I mean, it's almost like a dollhouse,
Yeah. A
except
murderous dollhouse. How lovely.
when you really start looking at it, then it's like, okay. But I really like that because it tells a little bit about that time period that this woman, this was her kind of entree into a topic she was interested in. She used her artistic, creative, kind of feminine side, to kind of enter that scene, where she probably would not have been able to find a place in that sort of work, but she was very creative in kind of carving out a little niche for herself. So I thought that was really cool.
I thought so too. And something that the author mentioned was that they spent as much money to build an actual house on these replicas. And in some instances, they like burned them down or destroyed them for like, effect. I thought that was so interesting. If I was like wealthy like that, if I had unlimited income, I'd be doing this too. There would be some Lady Jane doll houses out there. Oh my goodness, I loved that. I thought that was so fun, and it really illustrated the character that the person making them, had. I loved it. I thought that was so cool. And
That was really cool.
Also, I really liked how, because for the rest of the book, it's very science based. It's very like molecules, animals, and it's very, lab based. And by opening the book this way, it showed that at the time they didn't have access to a lot of the science stuff that we do now, when it comes to forensic pathology, forensic, science. And these powers of observation and putting things together were how most crimes were solved back then. So I thought that was a really cool juxtaposition of the opening to going into like the really, really heavy science things. I thought that was a really cool way to balance all of it. So I was happy she opened the book that way.
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes full circle with that, Jane, because I feel like a lot of people on juries now, they expect to have a lot of forensic evidence, but for a long time, and even today, a lot of your cases are solved based on circumstantial evidence and based on, very minimal forensic pieces that are put together. Maybe now it's more like cell phone sort of forensics that way, like,
Picking on
tracking
the
down
towers,
phone records and stuff like that. But, people expect DNA. And what's really interesting about this book is she brings up something that could be quite problematic for DNA. It was in one of the chapters, I think it was in part 2, so pretty close to the beginning of the book, but she was talking about blowflies and the possibility that blowflies could contaminate crime scenes, because essentially blowflies like to eat bodily fluids of humans. It could be anything. And they could take those bodily fluids from one house or area to another area, and essentially they could deposit DNA on a crime scene. And so you could essentially find DNA at a crime scene that implicates someone who's completely innocent. So I thought that was a really just groundbreaking piece of information. And I'm sure there's lots of science going on right now to try to resolve that and come up with some testing there. And actually, Kevin said there was one case in California she brought in where this happened. So, yeah. Time with Ryan just joined in to hear bodily fluids of humans, so that was nice. You're
That's
welcome,
awesome.
Ryan.
Hi, welcome.
Yeah, so that was kind of scary, actually.
It was. And jumping off of that, another section that I really liked was the one where she was talking about microbial, like the necrobiome or something, where you could actually measuring like the bacteria and like the DNA and to try to find a time of death. I thought we already did this. Speaking of like the jurors that think science is going to solve everything, I thought we already did that. I thought that was like a standard practice. So I was totally surprised to find out that that is not the case, and that with all this really, really interesting information about the deterioration of bacteria and cells and DNA, they can pinpoint like within 9 minutes the time of death. I thought that was so cool. I don't understand why this isn't standard practice yet, But just seeing that something so basic as microbiology can assist with a crime scene like that, I thought that was really neat. So that sprung to mind when you were talking about like the crime scenes as well.
Yeah, so much science there that could be used, and unfortunately, I have some family that's in law enforcement, and particularly in rural areas, you don't have a medical examiner. There is no medical examiner in your area. The closest one might be the state medical examiner 2 hours away. So unfortunately, I think, like you said, we kind of had the CSI idea that like this is always happening, but unfortunately for the majority of the country, it's just not happening, and we need more forensic scientists. I think if that's one lesson of this book, we need more people who are willing to suffer through that. And I was
Roll up
impressed.
those sleeves, roll them
Yeah,
up.
I was really impressed that this author went into not just the morgue, but she went into the area where they had the bodies that were suffering from bloat, and were in severe stages of decomposition. And she talked about leaving, and she was sniffing herself because she could still smell. And some of the other medical students who were with her said, "Oh, don't worry about that. No one can smell you. I know you'll still smell it for a day or two, but it's not actually on you." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I can't imagine, these medical students, these people who were, going through this training every day. It's just unreal. I'm glad that there are people who do that, because I can't imagine." Let's see. Ryan says, "My buddy produced CSI Miami and said judges used to complain because juries would just say, use the light." Oh, yeah.
That's awesome. Just use the light.
They test the temperature in the liver. Okay. Interesting. I think she was as hands-on with this Ryan as she could be, for sure. So, there was one section that several people, I think, were particularly interested in, and that was the section about our companion animals and whether or not our companion animals, so our cats and dogs, would eat us, if we passed away at home. And this one was interesting to me because cats have always gotten a bad rap. I feel like cats are always the one where it's like, oh, well, the cat, they're so independent and moody and unattached, but the science has proven that it is more likely that your dog would feed on you, before your cat would. So that was interesting to me, but I was glad that they clarified it's not because the dogs don't have affection for us. It's more likely because they're trying to wake up their owner. They see that their owner is not responsive, and so they're trying to nudge their owner, wake their owner, and that kind of devolves into biting, because that's of course the next step if they're trying to get someone's attention. So
something else that kind of stuck out to me about that is that we seem to really project our human values onto animals and to our pets. And this really illustrated that we may try to predict like animal behavior, but we can't, and this is a really, really great way. So to us, we're looking at that saying, oh my gosh, my dog must hate me. But in fact, there's probably a part of the brain that says, oh, I taste a little bit of blood. My instincts is to eat while we have food source, and this is only a small part of discovering that type of animal behavior, and it's so foreign to us because we are so based in logic and we're so based in reason, and they're not. So I thought that was really interesting, and I think that's where a lot of people go wrong in thinking, oh, my animal will never do that, and they forget that they are a survival being. Right. So I thought that was really interesting.
And it's interesting because some folks in the chat, they're talking about that they would be okay, if their animals did that, after they were gone. And what's interesting is, I think there was a survey or something in the book that she talked about, and um, several owners said that basically, like, I wouldn't fault my animal, like I wouldn't think any less of my animal if that's what happened. If they were just trying to survive, obviously I'm their caretaker and I'm no longer there. So what are they supposed to do? But good point you made about, they're animals. They have animal instincts, and the habit that cats have of cleaning themselves. A lot of people talk about, oh, cats, they are so clean. They're such clean animals. And I always have had a rule that I do not let animals kiss me on the face. I'm one of those people. I do not. And this book backed me up. This book backed up my train of thought there, because it talked about all of the different bacteria that are in cats and dogs' mouths, and how dogs' mouths in particular are pretty disgusting. And she even highlighted a couple of cases where some people had like an open wound or scratch, and their dog licked it, and they ended up with flesh-eating bacteria. And one person she mentioned actually had to have an amputation. So this is a PSA, people. I would not advise letting your animals kiss you.
Don't smooch on your pets.
If they do slobber on you, just wash your hands really thoroughly afterwards. I think that's the lesson there. But so the question that she brought up was, well, if cats' mouths are dirty, why do they spend so much time licking themselves? If the point is to get themselves clean. And the point is not really to get themselves clean. The point is to make sure they don't have any blood or anything that would smell on their coat, because cats are predators. They are hunters. So that's kind of the difference between the cats and the dogs there. The cats are still, that instinctual hunter. And so, they're trying to not alert their prey. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well.
And that's another instance where where we're projecting again that it's because of logic, but in fact it's actually based on instinct. So I loved that she illustrated that, and there's a couple of other points she used that as well. So I thought that was really cool. Yeah, and to my defense, if my dog's gonna kiss you, she's gonna sneak attack you. Like, no, you don't stand a chance against my dog. Like, you'll like hug her or whatever, and well, there you go.
Yeah. So some dogs are like that. They just,
you don't stand a chance against her. She gonna kiss you. She gonna kiss you.
So there were a couple parts that brought up some really quacky sort of science, or I don't even know if you would call it forensic science, because it's just these weird ideas that people had. But one that she just briefly mentioned was, I think it was in the 1800s, where they tried to take the eyes from corpses and develop the last image from the retinas. And I'm assuming this was like to try to catch a killer, to try to solve a murder. But of course that was quickly debunked. But what's interesting is she pointed out one practice that was pretty common for about 700 or 800 years. And that was the spontaneous bleeding. So essentially, if a body showed any signs of spontaneous bleeding through the nose, mouth, any part of the body, in the presence of a particular person, then that was seen as evidence, clear and incontrovertible evidence that this person was the murderer. So essentially they saw it as, a message from the victim, which was just, I guess it was the Middle Ages. So we shouldn't be shocked by these sort of trials by ordeal and stuff like that.
They tried. They didn't have TV. They tried their best.
Yeah. So that was pretty shocking. So I really liked how she kind of had some older older stories, some newer stuff. You know, a lot of the science and, you know, DNA stuff obviously was very new, but she did have a few historical stories in there as well. So, oh, I think someone already mentioned, I guess Kevin mentioned the fat Bergs.
Oh, this
Had you
grosses
heard?
me out.
Yeah,
I
had
did.
you heard of that before reading this book?
I did actually. I actually saw a program a few weeks ago about it on TV while I was flipping through the channels, and oh my gosh, I can't. So the fatbergs are these. Basically, the whole reason why we don't pour oil or fat down the drains is to avoid, first of all, plumbing problems, and second of all, the fatbergs. Now, these fatbergs are within the sewer system in many different countries, and it's basically a whole collection of trash, gross stuff, and all bound together from fat, from oil. So, you know, this congealed, like gross yellow, oily stuff. And so it's causing a major problem because number one, sewer blockage, which is never fun. And number two, they are highly flammable. And I never thought about this. And so I think the author did say that there were like times when they've exploded, you know, because they were lit, or they've just caused a lot of problems. But I think the grossest part of this, and this is what really skeeved me, of all the chapters, this was up there. She did say that some rather nefarious characters would actually take the fatbergs out of the street, drain them, and then sell it to make cooking oil. Oh my goodness, no. I can't, no. I don't fry anything anyway, but I'm really never going to fry anything ever again. That grossed me out so much because this is like in our sewer system, or in a sewer system, I should say. And so that whole idea just, it creeped me out like you wouldn't believe. So that is the fatbergs. Carrie, do you have anything to add?
So I was very disappointed because I'd heard of these before, and she mentioned in the chapter that London had a fat cam on this fatberg they had on display in one of their museums. It was, I guess, one of the biggest that they'd ever dislodged from their sewer system. And it's no longer active. I was so upset. I really wanted to see the fatberg cam because apparently all of these things like have grown on it, and yeah, it was always changing. It was kind of interesting. Kevin said I'm still going to eat fish and chips.
You go, Kevin. You go. Have an extra one for me. I will not be partaking. Yeah, but that's.
Pictures of fatbergs after we read that chapter. I was like, okay, let me
They're weird looking. They're scary. Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh goodness.
Oh boy.
Don't use the cooking oil.
Right. Oh my gosh. Please, folks, do not pour oil or anything down your. I couldn't believe they were talking about how many people like would flush all of these food particles and I mean just crazy things people would flush down their toilets. I'm like, I would be very concerned that my toilet would clog.
So speaking of which, okay, get comfortable. I had a friend who did building management, and he was kind of like the person who would go around and like fix something if it was broken, or check out something, or change the filters. Very, very nice. And one day he was telling me that he was called because there was some toilet issues. And he got there, and the lady had flushed an entire chef's salad down the toilet.
Why?
I don't know. And I asked him, I was like, why would she do that? And he's like, you know, Jane, I just don't know. I don't even know how she got it in there. So I felt like I couldn't ask. And I'm like, that was the time to ask. On what purpose would somebody be flushing an entire salad? I'm talking carrots, onions, celery, all the good stuff down the toilet. Like, I don't understand where the logic comes from here. So evidently it's a thing. It's a thing that people are flushing these things down the toilets. Who knew? Who knew? Talk about a salad bowl. Oh
Oh my
goodness,
gosh, that was
goodness.
very funny. That was very funny.
Yep. So, true
Um,
story. True story.
well, speaking of things that smell,
Mm.
one of the sections uh, talked about sniffing out sickness, and
Yeah.
that was really cool because I saw on a very old Unsolved Mysteries episode
Mm.
a story about a Labrador Retriever who essentially alerted his owner to the possibility that she had breast cancer, because the dog kept nudging her when she was taking a nap and just kind of acting kind of weird. And um, from all of that nudging, she eventually realized she had a lump, and that prompted her to go to the doctor. So apparently, this is something that's well known with dogs, that they can, in certain circumstances, sniff out some disease. But what was interesting in the story that this author included was that it was a person, and we're not necessarily known for having, very, um, good, you know, sniff tactics, I guess. But there was a lady whose husband had Parkinson's disease, and she kept telling the doctors that people with Parkinson's had a particular smell. And so they did a blind test, and she not only identified everyone who had Parkinson's disease, but she also identified several people who hadn't yet been diagnosed with the disease, but they eventually were diagnosed with the disease within like 6 months.
It's amazing.
So I thought that was just phenomenal, and so much untapped potential there. Obviously, I think with things like that, it's not an exact science. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a human, so there's human error there, but still pretty cool.
That was amazing. And I think especially with animals, they have this really, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit of echo. I'm sorry. They do have this amazing sense of smell, and I've always believed that, especially when someone's like close to death, they can sometimes alert people as well. I've heard so many stories about animals, getting in people's faces when they're like past or terminal people. Their animals come to lie down on them. So it's really amazing to see that the sense of smell could be used in many different ways in that capacity as well.
Yeah, very,
Yeah.
very neat. Um, Probably for me, the most creepy section of this book had to do with head transplants.
Mm.
And this part of the book opened up a whole discussion within our group chat about how the possibility of a head transplant would impact the person and their relatives, and who would they be really, because when you think about it and you think about anatomically, really, where does your soul or
Reside.
your essence, yeah, reside? So kind of interesting there. What was the, if it wasn't that section, what section was the most creepy for you?
There were a couple. I mean, like I said, I texted you and I was like, "Girl, what are we reading?" There was a couple. There was I'm looking back at my notes. I'm sorry. Uh,
While you're looking, I'm just going to throw this out there to everyone. So of course, you would think that the section on cannibalism would be the most creepy, but actually that was quite informative, because the author points out that pound for pound, humans are not very nutritional. So we don't really make good prey, which is really good for us as far as evolution goes, because, we have not killed each other for food. Historically, that's a very rare circumstance. And when it does happen, a lot of times it has some sort of religious
hmm.
um, meaning behind it. So there are some tribes in the world that have practiced cannibalism, but it's more of a ritualistic kind of thing. It's not necessarily for basic survival. So I thought that was a really interesting part. And, you know, of course, that's the part that most people would probably expect us to say was the most disturbing. But Jane, what did you think? What was the
So I actually really like the section on the clowns. I remember this was later on in the book. So clowns creep everybody out, but I never really understood why. You know, because they're just kind of like this cultural thing. When there's like a creepy clown, everybody kind of gets on edge. And I love the way she explained that because they're humanoid, like they're human-like,
right?
but they're not quite human, and they're emotionless, and you don't know the motives. That's where creep factor comes in, and that's your body's natural response of unsure of whether or not there's a threat. So now I'm thinking back because I love horror. We all know Lady Jane loves horror. So now I'm thinking back to all the creepy like movies that I've seen and all like the weird tropes that I like. And that's really where the creep factor comes in. I thought that was a really cool way to illustrate why, because I think that's very central to a lot of people. You know, the hairs on your back of your neck stand up. And to illustrate that with clowns was so cool. So I thought that was like it was the most interesting, and it was kind of the most unsettling for me, because I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago there was this clown craze like around.
Yes.
Yes. And people were seeing creepy clowns, and I think it was like American Horror Story at the time. They had a creepy clown, and it was like and it I think had just come out or something. And so a lot of people were like on the bandwagon about that, but that was a terrifying time for a lot of people. And reading this, I was like, oh, okay, that's why we were all freaked out, because you don't quite understand why clowns are so creepy, but she broke it down in a way that it actually made a lot of sense. So that was one of my favorite sections. I really liked the head transplants. I thought that led to a lot of different religious and spiritual discussion and implications. I thought that was really cool. And what was the last one? Oh, the eyes, the little friends in the eye. That one bothered me like you wouldn't believe. Yes,
Kevin
that's it.
agrees.
That's it, Kevin. Yes. See,
Yes.
Kevin and I are on the same wavelength.
And I apologize to the group because I did send that video of the worm being taken out of the eye that happened a few years ago in India. But yeah, of course, after I read that section, I thought about that and I was like, okay, let me just
Oh,
Google that
sorry.
video really quick. But
Yeah, that was
so
and I think what the weirdest part of that was is that she didn't know how they got them. So they know conceptually that like if you touch something and then you touch your eye, or there has to be like a fly or something, there's some type of contact, but it's extremely rare because of the space like diameter. It's like 100,000 or something like that. Very rare. But it happened to her. You know what I mean? So I'm like, ooh,
yeah.
and she has no idea how. That creeps me out like you wouldn't believe. It does. That bothered me a lot. So that was my crowning achievement of creep over there.
And it was funny because Mark and I were like, "Oh my gosh, this video is so like satisfying." Them pulling this thing out of
Yeah,
this
it's
person's
not,
eye.
Carrie.
I don't know. But it did make me feel better because the author said basically, if you're someone who swats flies out of the way and you swat bugs off of you, that you should never have any of these issues because, again, like you said, it's so rare. And, you know, maybe she just, there was that one fly and she didn't swat him off in time, I suppose. But what's interesting is we have creepy crawlies on us all the time because this author talked about the mites that are on our face and these little microscopic 8-legged mites that burrow into our pores. And yeah, that kind of
Creeps you
yeah.
out.
Yeah, it gives you that
Yeah.
reaction for sure. But she pointed out that it's probably a symbiotic sort of relationship because we feed them all of the gunk that is in our pores, and they kind of do a little bit of housekeeping for us. So, you know, you never know. In the next few years, we might have a mite facial that will come out, and
I'm
people will
thinking
actually put extra mites on their face.
that is
Don't
one
think
beauty
so.
treatment I will not sign up for. Thank you very much.
Well, there have been some pretty bizarre beauty treatments that have come out there, so I would not put it past them. to do something crazy like that. Um,
You know what else was really creepy? The one about the worms in the brain and like the kid that ate the slug and got the
oof.
worms. I was like, this is 100% preventable, guys. You can
Do not eat
1000%
slugs
not eat
on
a
a
slug.
dare.
Don't eat slugs. Don't do it. Don't do it. Yeah,
Oh my
but that was
gosh.
honestly really scary and really like that one I think was one of the more scary ones for me because it was so once that train started, there was really no stopping it because it was
Right.
so rare. And it was so destructive that this boy's life changed forever. It just I felt really bad about that one, but that was another one that I'm like, nope,
Yeah.
that grossed me out.
There was a lot of talk about roaches and rats in this book. And what's interesting is they talked a lot about roaches as being a model for robots because they're pretty much indestructible. I mean, these roaches will lose an appendage or two and they keep running like nothing ever happened. Um, so I'm reading another book right now. It's about a runner. It's called A Heart and a Body and a Soul.
Hmm.
I think it's Deb Coletti, maybe, young adult writer. But at the beginning of every chapter, the narrator gives you a few kind of fun facts about hearts. And one of the fun facts was about roaches, because apparently roaches have 13 chambers in their heart. And so that's another way that they're very resilient because they can have a few chambers of their heart completely fail and they don't miss a beat. They don't miss a beat. They
Literally,
just keep going.
literally.
Literally. I did that on purpose.
Didn't dare.
Um, but that was pretty gross. I just roaches I think are just universally creepy. Roaches and rats.
Mm-mm.
And one thing that we all talked about as a group was the section that talked about female anatomy. And I'm not going to get into too
Mm.
much detail, but I learned more about female anatomy in this book than I probably ever did in my science classes, which is really sad. And I was very shocked to find out that the first scientific paper to fully describe the female anatomy in detail wasn't published until 1998.
That was scary.
That is scary because we had urologists performing surgeries on females with no real understanding of the intricate nature of their anatomy. There was plenty of information on males, specifically with like prostate surgeries and trying to make sure everything was still, in working order. But that just blew me away.
Yeah, that was quite shocking to me as well because that wasn't that long ago. You know what I mean?
I
It's
know.
just yeah, that was
And I
shocking.
felt bad when we got to that section because I started, kind of going on these tangents, and I sent a link to a crime junkie episode about the Dawkins Shield, which was it was a pretty sick kind of white collar crime, I guess you'd call it. But essentially, this company was making an IUD device that was ineffective and was also very dangerous, and it killed some
Mm.
women and made some women infertile and caused them to have all sorts of issues. And um, this book kind of made me think about that, so I posted it in the group, and then I had to give a shout out to a couple of guys who were in our group. I was like, thank you guys. I appreciate you hanging in there because they were great sports. They were great sports with that section. But, it's just wild that the section about human anatomy, female human anatomy, was in the part labeled taboo. You know,
I noticed that
it
too, and
just,
I was like,
which I understand why she did that. It is taboo, or has been taboo. Obviously,
yeah,
if we didn't have a scientific anatomical paper about it until 1998. I guess
true.
it
I
is.
guess. Mm.
Um, Speaking of bugs, there was a part of the book that talked about people feeling like they had
Yeah,
bugs crawling all over them, and
yeah.
they were literally like sending skin samples to all these doctors, and there's nothing wrong with them, What did you think about that?
I thought that was actually that was a hard one to read because it really played on these people believing something, and that's really hard to break if someone believes something like that. You know what I mean? And so I felt really bad for these individuals that they were so strongly believed that it was physically happening to them, and the doctor would look at it and say, no, there's nothing in the sample, there's no bugs. And I felt that a lot of doctors kind of brush that off. You know what I mean? Well, there's no physical bugs, there's nothing I can do. So,
Right.
and that led to a very, very like tough existence for individuals suffering with this particular. I think it's a psychological, right? I think she said that it was a psychological disorder. So I felt really bad, when I read that a lot of doctors would ignore it or just kind of brush them off. Because to them it was so real, and they have to live that day after day after day. I felt that deserved way more attention, especially for people who are suffering from this. But I actually did find it very, very fascinating because that's the power of the mind. The mind can convince
Yeah.
you of something if it's really never happened, it's never going to happen, but that belief is so strong that they have no choice but to continue this behavior and this belief system. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought it was very tough to read for as a person, but I thought it was really, really interesting. What do you think, Carrie?
Yeah. Yeah, it was very tough to read about what these people did to their skin,
Yeah.
essentially trying to rid themselves of these imaginary bugs. And I'm with you; it was really sad because for some of these patients, yes, it was psychological, but for some of them, it was prompted by hormonal changes. Like some of these people had stopped hormone therapy, or they had a change in medication, and sometimes the medication would cause that bugs crawling under your skin
Yeah.
sensation. That was one of the side effects. So I thought, like just like you, that was really sad, but it was kind of cool
It
because it
was.
showed you the power of the mind. Like the human mind is so powerful, and I love listening to this podcast. It's called the Model Health Show,
Hmm.
and they recently did an episode all about the power of the mind when it comes to our health. And
Hmm.
they talked about a lot of these placebo studies and how they've done it with like knee surgeries and all sorts of things like that. And, really, it does have a huge, huge impact because if you believe you are a sick person, then you're going to live your life that way. Now, of course, I'm not saying like the mind can cure everything, but it definitely helps. It definitely helps, and it can definitely hurt, like in this case, with these poor people thinking that they have bugs all over. But I could just totally picture that poor woman when they were talking about her, like throwing away all of her bedding and getting all,
Yeah.
I could totally picture that. That having said, Harvard did a study that showed placebos are becoming more effective over the years.
Hmm.
And, they've done studies on things like prayer as well,
Hmm.
and people who have, any sort of religious faith that if it's something that you truly believe will help you, then chances are
It does.
it will help you. Yeah. Um, and it doesn't hurt to have a good mindset, even if it doesn't cure whatever's physically ailing you. But yeah, I thought that was a pretty cool section as well.
It was very cool. The other part that I really liked was the rundown on the different type of like psychological disorders. So like a lot of people mistakes sociopath with psychopath and things like that. And so she dedicated an entire chapter of just listing out the yes and no's of every single um, symptom and different type of what would you call it, like the categories of these type of things. And I thought that was really cool, and it was so comprehensive. And I love that she used media as an illustration of, well, Norman Bates isn't actually X, Y, and Z, but he is X, Y, and W. And I thought that was a really cool way to dedicate that chapter, because that's something that people are fascinated about, this like sociopathic, psychopathic, borderline, all these other different types of conditions. So I thought that was really interesting. That was one of my favorite chapters. I thought it was fascinating because, of course, Ted Bundy was mentioned. So of course it was going to be interesting to Lady Jane. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That was cool. And I'm with you. I liked that she used the movie references there to kind of help with the categorization of psychopaths versus sociopaths. And I think she said that the Godfather was the most legitimate psychopath.
Corleone.
Yeah. And that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
That made sense
It's the
to
most
me
realistic.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
the other ones are more scary. Yeah. This one is realistic. Yeah, for sure.
So fun little side story. In school, Lady Jane had to do a project on a psychological disorder for her psychology class. And we had to do that exact thing. We had to pick out somebody in the media that we suspected had certain traits.
Wow.
So, of course, Lady Jane got antisocial personality disorder. Mm-hmm. And so I actually used Hannibal Lecter, Dr. Hannibal from Silence of the Lambs. And so I played a clip in class that was a little violent, and it was so bad that she stopped it. And she's like, okay, we're done with class now. Because evidently I picked the wrong one. But then on the paper, she wrote, good job. And she gave me an A because, of course, my argument actually fit. But everybody freaked out in class, and they're like, Jane, you should not have shown that in class. I'm like, I'm sorry, it's a movie. So yeah.
Well, and if you were using YouTube, sometimes they'll get you because
No, I bought the DVD that time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, I was in on this project.
You were in it, yeah.
I was in it to win it, and so it worked out in the end. But I was mad that she made me stop playing it because I'm like, the best part's coming up. This is why X, Y, and Z. So
I'm sure you went through a thorough explanation without the clip. I'm sure you got an A+. So
I did. She didn't want to tell anybody I got an A+, but I did.
So I'm going to assume that everyone as a child heard the story that there was a magic dye that could be put in pools that would indicate when someone had urinated in the pool by showing up red. Did everyone heard that? Anyone else? Anyone in the chat
heard that?
Heard that? I heard that all my life growing up. I've always heard that. And guess what, guys? It's a myth. It's a myth. There is no chemical that would do such a thing.
All those years, Carrie.
All those years.
All those years of holding it.
I tell you. But that was kind of interesting because right around the time that I was reading this book, there was a chemical reaction of some sort at a pool in my area, a public pool. And they actually had to get hazmat out there because people were getting sick. People had burning eyes, people were vomiting, all of this stuff. And that's one of the things that she talked about in this book with the pool segment was that, if there was, it's not great to pee in the pool because it's gross, but it could also, create this chemical reaction. But she also said it would require so much of the chlorine chemicals and the urine that it would never happen. But I thought that was interesting because I was like, oh my gosh, there's a chemical reaction going on at this pool. People are getting sick. But I think it was a reaction to them putting too many cleaning chemicals in the pool or something. They got the mixture wrong. But still, ugh. Just one of those things you don't want to think about what's in the swimming pool, and you don't want to think about what oil your fast food is being fried in.
Basically, summer is canceled.
Those fat Bergs. One thing that was really cool was the fecal transplants.
was trying to avoid
And
this one. Ooh,
you were trying to avoid this one?
I
Okay, so
was, but that's okay. That's okay. Continue.
so one of my former students, she is actually a fitness coach, and she is a wonderful person, and she's very invested in helping people on their health journey. But she is a licensed gut practitioner, and so she tries to help people get their digestive system back on track. And she's had some issues in her past with digestive issues and like leaky gut and that sort of thing, imbalances in your gut microbiome. So of
Mhm.
course, when I got to that section and it started talking about our gut microbiome, I like screenshotted the page and sent it to her because I thought it was so cool. Like, who else is interested in this stuff? Apparently quite a few people, because it was in this book.
The whole chapter.
But yeah, she pointed out in the chapter that there is a thing called fecal transplants where they can transplant someone else's microbiome, from their digestive tract to a different person, and it can resolve their issues. So if their microbiome is out of whack, if they don't have enough good bacteria, this is why a lot of people invest in all of those prebiotics and probiotics and all of those things. But what's unfortunate, a lot of those supplements people buy, they don't necessarily work, because I don't
Mm.
think some of those probiotics and prebiotics actually make it to the
Mm.
place they need to. Like, I don't think they survive long enough to get where they need to get to. So, it was interesting to hear about how that came to be. And do you remember the exact story about the doctor who tried that?
No, I
I
don't
can't.
actually remember that, but I do know that this was actually in I think it was a House episode or something years ago. And I was like, that
Okay.
wouldn't happen. No. And then I read this and I'm like,
I want
it's
to
a thing.
say in this book, the first doctor who attempted it, he did it in pill form. So it wasn't, I
Okay.
mean, you wouldn't,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not
No,
like there
yeah.
was
Now
any
this does, right,
icky,
right, right.
there was no icky sort of feeling to it, even though it technically is a fecal transplant.
No spoons.
Um,
Sorry. I couldn't help it. Okay.
you had to go there. You had to go there. Good thing I already ate dinner. But so it was interesting that he does this kind of below the radar at first. Like, he doesn't really alert people in the hospital that he's doing this. And so when they find out, they kind of come down hard on him, but it worked. I mean, it worked. It's like, he understood that once he told them what he wanted to do, they would have that. Even medical doctors,
Mm.
they would have that ick
Yeah.
reaction.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm just kind of blown away that that's a thing now and it works.
Yeah. I didn't believe it was a thing when I saw it on the episode, but when I read it, I was like, oh, heck no. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's another one. Nope, nope, nope. That actually was my grossest ick factor one, but I didn't want to bring it up.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you did, Gary.
Yeah. Well, you know, for a lot of people do struggle with digestive health. Unfortunately, I think, we just have such poor nutrition.
Mm.
And I read the other day that Americans, 60% of our diet isn't food, it's food like products.
Mm.
And that's the whole reason, a lot of people, their gut microbiome is in such a state. That's why it's so out of whack. So it's kind of crazy. Not that I'm reading every label, guys, but just it's something to think about.
Mm. That's true.
One thing we talked about that was kind of cool was sweat. And a few of
Earwax.
us in the group, admitted some things about our sweat and our earwax. Um, the earwax thing was interesting because apparently different ethnicities have different consistencies with their earwax, and it's a big no-no, guys, to take a Q-tip or a cotton swab, or I forget what Mark called it. Do you remember?
No, No, I don't. But I remember I was like, what is that? And
Mark's
then
from the UK, so he had a different word for it. I can't remember. Cotton tip or something. I can't remember. But you're not supposed to actually clean out your ears with the earwax. Your ears are a self-cleaning oven, according to this author, and you should just let them do their job. And I guess it's supposed to be very rare for people to overproduce earwax, and it should be removed by a professional. And she did mention that ear candling and how
Mm.
dangerous that is and
Yeah,
how
that
it
doesn't
actually
work.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
But
I
I
never
don't know about you, but I've seen that like on
I
TV, on YouTube.
I've seen it, but I was always skeptical because I'm like, that doesn't I don't see how that would work. You know what I mean? I don't
Right.
see technically. I've never done it. Kudos if you have, but not for me.
I will admit I do use a Q-tip and I do clean out my earwax. And apparently I'm doing more harm than good because the
Right.
author says I'm pushing it in there. But I don't know. I just can't help if I feel a little anything, I've just gotta get
Carrie,
in
you gotta
there.
stop. You gotta
I
stop,
know.
Carrie. It's a dangerous path. Right to the canal.
um, so there was that, and then she also talked about how different people sweat differently. I mean,
Mm.
everyone has different um, differences as far as how much they sweat, but she talked about different ethnicities and their
Mm.
sweat having different smells. And I think it was even Mark who talked about he lived, I think, in Japan,
Mm.
and that the people there commented that, Europeans, their sweat was kind of smellier. And they thought it had something to do with a lot of dairy in our
Mm.
diet, which is kind of interesting because I never really thought about it. But I'm one of those people that I sweat a tremendous amount.
Me
When
too.
I exercise, I sweat a ton. And my dad is the same way, which I'm actually very grateful for because I would overheat so quickly because I get super red. I mean, I get very red faced. I get super sweaty, like to the point the last half marathon I ran, the ambulance drove by and a guy yelled out of the passenger window. He's like, "Are you okay?" I gave him a thumbs up, but I'm sure he saw my
Yeah.
face and he saw how much I was sweating, and he was like, "Okay, she might need a ride in the back." But
Slow down.
yeah, that was kind of interesting about the differences in sweat. And I mean, some people just lucked out with that gene where their sweat doesn't smell.
My
That's
mom's
just
like that. She does not smell. No, I'm very jealous.
yeah. Kevin said, "Wouldn't Q-tips go out of business if people stopped cleaning their ears?" Yeah, that's kind of my question is what do other people use them for if not for clean, even though it says, I think it even says on the box,
Do
you're
not
not
use
supposed
it.
to use them
I think
for
people
that,
use it
but
for cleaning pores, because you're not supposed to use your hands, like with the fluffer
okay.
type of thing. So like that.
Gotcha.
I do think sometimes cleaning your eyes, like makeup removing sometimes. I know I remove my makeup with some if I have like eyeliner in my corner eye. So there are uses. Don't stick it
Gotcha.
in your
Okay.
ears.
Okay. Makes sense. Makes sense. Um, and one of the last things I wrote down was the voodoo dolls.
This was cool. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. I forget all of the
Yeah, I forget some of the details, but I think the basic gist was that they did an experiment where they gave people voodoo dolls and they said, okay, like here, pretend this is someone you don't like and, stab it or punch or I don't know, do something like violent to it. And people like got really into it. But then overall, they seemed like happier afterwards and they were able to get along with the people that they were envisioning the voodoo doll as. I think that was more like an outlet of human aggression and that it was kind of a way to manage those kind of negative feelings. But what did you think, Carrie? I thought that was.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting because, I've read quite a few, I guess, self-development books or
Mm.
whatever you'd call them. And there's kind of mixed reviews on that. Like some books I read, they talk about, really working hard to change your thinking about something because you're in complete control of your feelings. So if you're angry or if you're upset about something, you can't change what the other person did, but you can change, kind of the story you tell yourself about it. And
Your
then,
reaction. Yeah.
yeah, others kind of align with this little voodoo doll experiment, which says you need to let it out. You need to address this. You need to let it out. And I do see kind of a version of this coming out in recent years. I don't know if you've seen or heard about these rooms. They're basically like
The
smash
rage
rooms. Like
rooms.
you
Yeah,
just
rage rooms or
yeah, you
something. Yeah.
just go in
I
and
want to go to
demolish.
one. I want to go to one. I think it'd be fun. I think it'd be fun. And
So
you just like whack things and smash.
yeah.
It'd be cool.
So I feel like that's kind of a version of the voodoo doll, but I thought was pretty funny is that they have online versions of these little voodoo dolls, and they worked just as good as like the actual um doll, the
Physical,
actual
yeah,
physical
physical
doll.
ones. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
kind of weird. I mean, we humans are weird,
They
aren't
are.
we?
We're much more complex than we give ourselves credit for.
We
I mean,
really are.
if this book said anything, it's that we are much weirder than we think. Just by being fascinated by this stuff, we already know we're way more weird than we want to admit. So
Well, and two, something else that she brought out with that, I think, is that a lot of these things that we're fascinated with or curious about are things that scare us,
mm,
unknowns,
mhm.
things that give us anxiety. And I think maybe our fascination with them or our attempt to learn more about them or understand them is just human nature trying to come to grips with all of that and really, trying to come to grips with your own fears and your own mortality and that sort of thing. And it kind of disarms a lot of these scary things if
Mm.
you read about them in a scientific sort of way. So yeah, I really um, enjoyed reading about these things with everyone in the group. It was really
So
nice to
good.
read with other folks. And Kevin said, "Did either of you try the website where you can stab the dolls?"
No, I should, but no.
I did
It,
not. I did Google it. I did Google, like, because I wanted to see which one specifically she was talking about. And I don't think she gave a specific website for the
no,
one. And when you click on a website and it kind of looks like it could have a virus or something, it
sketchy.
just looks kind of suspect. That's why I didn't like click on them
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
was concerned. And yeah, so I did not. I'm curious, Kevin, if you did.
yeah, Kevin.
Yeah.
I do know there are games though, and I do think a lot of gaming channels will like do them that are very similar to them, but they have like a storyline type of thing. So like things
Gotcha.
like that. So I think there's like a modern take to them. You might see them on some gamer channels about that. Um, but what I do really want to try, and I was gonna ask if you want to like try this with me at some point, but I want to go see the photos of the little miniature houses because she said the public can see them. We won't know the answer, but she said the public can see them and try to like point together and like discuss them just as fun. So I think that'd be cool. I was wondering, do you want to check one out at some point?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah,
We'd
that'd be
solve the
fun.
murders. We would solve it, Carrie. I'm telling you, it would be great. It'll be a Carrie and Jane. Okay. So I'll wear a hat. It's gonna be great. And then we'll just like spend hours just looking at these photos of these little miniature houses and we'll solve the murder. I have full faith in this.
I do too, because as soon as I read that chapter, I think I even posted in the group chat. I was like, okay, Jane, you're so good at figuring out the endings to these really complicated, like psychological thrillers. You're
Mhm.
always on point with that. So I have full confidence that you would be able to solve these little nutshell cases.
Yes. So I think that'd be cool. I might try it. I think we'd do good. And I think you
I
should be
think
with
we
me
would
with
too.
that. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. All
Good.
right.
Got it settled.
So Is there anything else? I think that pretty much covers everything that we wanted to chat about. Is there anything else you want to say, Jane, about the book? Or
So I just want to reiterate, I know we talked about a lot of stuff today and a lot of shocking, gross, weird stuff. But again, this isn't a book about shock factor. It's a book about knowledge. It's a book about getting to know a lot of the weird and wonderful things in the world. I liked the way that she approached that. I think it's very valuable. I wish a lot of other um, authors did the same, because then it makes our knowledge accessible. It brings new ideas and new ways of thinking and new perspectives on these really, really scary things into the limelight. So I'm so glad that I read Gory Details. I had a great time in our group read. And I think it was a really, really interesting book, if you can stomach it.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Reminded me a little bit of Sam Keen.
Yeah, right? I was going to
And
say
he,
it, but it's like a little bit grosser.
yeah, and he was a podcaster, right? So that kind of makes sense to me that these podcasters slash bloggers that are now writing books, it's done in such a way that it's informative, it's entertaining, and the chapters are just short enough, to where it captures your attention. You learn a little something, but it doesn't get too sciencey. I don't think sciencey is a
No.
word, but it is now. It doesn't get too detailed with the science or the terminology that it's over your head. So yeah, pretty cool.
And it's not gross for the sake of being gross.
Right.
That was the biggest thing too. It's realistic. It doesn't shy away from anything, but it doesn't harp on a lot of like the more unsettling details. It just kind of presents them as fact. So that's what I really appreciate about this, is that it is a lot of sensitive material, but it's not a shock factor book. So that was my favorite part.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I guess that wraps this live up. So thank you to everyone who joined us today for the live show. And thank you so much, Lady Jane, for co-hosting this month with me. And of course, thanks to everyone who was in the book club this month. And just throwing it out there, if you guys are interested, the Black Hearts Book Club will be reading The Red House Mystery for the month of July by A.A. Milne. And that is the creator of Winnie the Pooh, but apparently he was a mystery writer before that. So very excited to read that. It's a pretty short read. So if you want to pop in for that, just let me know, guys. And I hope everyone's having a great day. And thanks again so much, Jane. Always a pleasure. And
Thank
you
you
look
so much.
fabulous. We
Thank
might
you.
always have to try to match with the book
We
from now on.
we will. We will. My people will talk to your people. Except there's
Okay,
no people.
perfect.
It's just me and you.
It's just we'll get there one day now. Alrighty, guys. See you later.
Bye.